Okay, good morning. Start our class soon. Okay, let's wait for others to join. Good. Adish, your profile picture, is that a polar bear or something else?
Sir, it's a dog.
Oh, it's probably too close. Okay, looks very furry.
Yes, sir. It's clicked at such an angle that it looks like a polar bear first.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay, so we'll start our class. So we have been talking about genomic libraries and cDNA libraries. Just give me a minute. Okay. So we have been looking at the applications of genomic and cDNA libraries, right? So as I have reiterated many a times, right? Genomic libraries are very, very useful when you are working with, say, a prokaryote, and you are trying to say, find a novel gene, right? Prokaryotes, by virtue of the fact that they don't have introns and the genes are their genome is densely packed with genomes, right? Gene A is followed by gene B, it is followed by gene C, it does look like, you don't have to worry about making a cDNA out of that, right? So it's very nice that you can use, different restriction enzymes, and you can get away by cloning them into plasmids or into phage, lambda phages typically, or another phage called P1, and you can very quickly make a library. It need not be, only bacteria, small viruses and certain other prokaryotic genomes, which have a fairly, short genomes, can generally be sequenced, by making a library, and then you can start, looking at the gene of interest. It's typically, as I said, if you look at E. coli genome, E. coli genome is about 4.6 million base pairs. Assuming that your gene of interest, say, let us say, occupies, say, around 1 or 2 kilo base pairs, to fish out that particular 2 kilo base pairs out of this 4.6 million is a tough task, right? Of course, it took a lot of advancements before people could figure out how to easily do these things. What we are doing is a partly historical and partly the mix of what is the latest. So you're going to have a historical context to everything, right? So PCR has been a great boon nowadays. It's simply easy to do a PCR and sequence the genome. Earlier that was not the case. So people had a variety of ways by which they could make library. Even today, libraries are very, very important because countries have sealed their borders from exploitation of their natural resources. For example, suppose today you find a bacterium that has say some therapeutic value, you cannot ship live stuff to other researchers in the world. People may be interested in understanding the newly discovered organism that you people have discovered. You cannot be shipping that organism as such, right? And so it makes a lot of sense to make a genomic library and then right. Um, I'm getting a signal. It says weak signal. Okay. So you can legally you cannot ship any new bacteria or anything new species that you find to any researcher, right? But you can make a library and you can share libraries, right? You can share libraries. So that is one reason why people will still are interested in making libraries. But slowly this thing of making libraries is slowly getting outdated simply because sequencing has been such a boon that people can now sequence anything at will. That means anytime you want to do any sequencing, that technology has matured to such an extent that it is possible to do that. Just to give an analogy, we still have 2G phones, we still have 3G phones, we still have 4G phones, and 5G phones are soon to come, right? So you have all this spectrum available, right? And it is what you choose, right? Some people would choose 3G, some people would probably still have that old listing. Some people have moved on to other listings. There is something like that. There are people who still would like to make a library, share the library. There are people who would say, just give me genomic DNA and I can generate the sequence. And from that sequence, once it enters into the database, it is much more easier these days to see what is the kind of gene that you are interested in. You can simply do a database search and you will have it. Nevertheless, we will look at quickly in today's class. We will wind up this how cDNA and genomic libraries are made, and we will start with the next module from our next class. Okay, so let's quickly, there we go. I'm kind of worried because the moment I put it in this thing, slideshow mode, something or the other happens. Is the slide visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So I actually said making, screening, analyzing gene libraries, and then cDNA clones and genomic clones. For some reason that is missing. I don't know. Anyway, doesn't matter. There we go. Now it's frozen. Let me see if I can get back. Okay. So what are genomic clones? Genomic clones nothing but, they contain literally, every piece of DNA, every fragment of DNA. Okay. Where are they used? They're used to obtain the detailed structure of genes. They're useful for identifying regulatory regions. You can use them to map and analyze alterations in the genome. For example, we know that sickle cell disease is because of a point mutation, right? So you can identify, you can do what are called as mutational studies, right? You can alter the genome. This is something that has been possible only in the recent, right? And you can make genetic changes. For example, this is what is being done when people go for gene therapy. It is still in the experimental realm. It has not come into the clinic, but it is likely to come into the clinic probably in about a decade or maybe less than a decade, right? It was something that was attempted in the 80s, late 80s. Then it was met into a lot of issues, and then it was stopped, and then it has started again. So it is likely that within the next decade we may see gene therapy as a possible option for treating untreatable diseases, right? And then you can, as I said, you now have the ability to sequence genomes at will, right? So the use of genetic information is a powerful tool that is now being made available to literally everybody in the world. Now the human genome is an open book. The database is open for everybody. How you want to read or what you want to make out of it, it is entirely up to the scientist, right? In order to use this powerful tool, it's important to understand, how to navigate the entire genome, right? The human genome, as we all know, is about 3 billion base pairs. 99.9% of the human genome has been sequenced, has been annotated, and is there on the database. Okay, so 0.01% is still, being done. It's likely to be done very quickly. Right? So the first draft today, if you look at a magazine called Science magazine is celebrating 20 years of completion of human genome. Okay. I'll show you probably by end of this, what all topics. I think you all live in an exciting time when science is really poised to take off. So how do we construct a genomic library? There are two ways by which, you can obtain genomic information. One is from genomic library, which contains so in this context, we are talking about human genome, but it could be any other genome, okay? Uh, so in this case, when you want to obtain the genomic information can be obtained from genomic library, which contains the entire human genome, which means both exons and introns. You can also obtain genomic information from cDNA library that contains only the exons or the expressed regions of the genome. Right. Either way, you can get the genomic information, right? And typically, if you look at the construction of a library, it doesn't matter whether it's a cDNA or a genomic library. When you talk about gene libraries, right, you take a tissue or a cell that is of interest to you, isolate the messenger RNA. The messenger RNAs are converted to cDNAs by the use of certain enzymes like reverse transcriptases, and then you also do certain additional manipulations to cDNA. Okay. Similarly, when you talk about DNA, when you talk about genomic DNA, either you will go for partial or complete restriction digestion, depending on what kind of restriction enzyme you use. If you use a SAW3A, which cuts every 256 base pairs, you would use probably a partial digestion. If you are using a 6 base cutter like ECOR1 or BAMH1, you would probably go for a complete digestion, right? And then you would fractionate them based on the size, because we all know that each of these vectors, whether you are using plasmid or lambda phage or cosmid or any of these, they have a capacity. They have certain capacity only they can carry. So you would size fractionate them, okay, and then you would ligate the vector and either the genomic DNA or the converted cDNA. You would transform them into E. coli, or depending on the system, what system we will see today, you will be screening for the desired clones, and then you would probably be amplifying them for a long-term storage. Okay, so typically, as we have talked, when it comes to genomic libraries, the initial this thing was to use plasmids, but then the problem with plasmids is you will be having so many clones to screen, right? So instead, people started using a phage called lambda phage, which is a bacteriophage, right? So this bacteriophage, okay, the advantage with this lambda bacteriophage is that we can screen simultaneously about 50,000, this thing, phages in a small petri dish, right? Remember last time we talked about hundreds of bacteria, hundreds of colonies in one plate, but with phages, you can literally screen thousands and thousands of phages, okay? Also, lambda phage has a higher transformation efficiency, and it is about 1,000 times better than a plasmid, which means with a small amount of DNA, you can screen, very easily the gene of interest, okay? And the lambda phage has two life cycles, two modes of life cycle. One is called as a lytic cycle, one is called as a lysogenic cycle. And typically, when we use lambda phage as a cloning vector, the genes that are responsible for the lysogenic phase, they have been removed. Okay, so this essentially grows now only as a lytic pathway. Okay, so typically you are trying to clone your gene of interest into this region, which is called as a replaceable region. This is the region that controls the lysogeny. Okay, we don't want lysogeny, we want lytic cycle. So this part of the genome that is responsible for the lambda head and lambda tail is retained, and this part of the genome that is responsible for lytic functions, for lysing the bacteria, are retained, and this middle part, this middle part which is responsible for lysogeny is removed. Okay. So an infected E. coli will produce, inside the E. coli, as the lambda phage is maturing, it starts making the head fragments, it starts making the tail fragments, and it also, the genomic DNA, right? When it is making, it makes what is called as concatamers. Concatamers are nothing but, okay, a series of the viral genome that are joined at the end. They are joined at the end because of a sequence called cos or cohesive sequences. Okay, and then typically what happens is within the lambda phage, you have two proteins called as mu1 and A protein that will take this DNA, and the moment they recognize this cos site, they will cleave it. Okay, so this results in a head full of the DNA. Okay, that's typically, this head can carry about 70 kilobase pairs, but in reality, the phage sequence is only about 50 kilobase pairs. That means you can have up to 20 kilobase pairs as additional DNA. Okay, so this, the moment it recognizes cos, it cleaves, and so this head is full of DNA. Once this head is occupied with DNA, then it fuses with the tail, and then this is what results in the complete virion, okay, which is now can infect the new bacteriophages. Okay, so typically, how do we make a genomic library? For example, let us say this is the human genomic DNA, which is about 3 billion base pairs. You partially digest with SAW3A and make about 20 kilobase pair fragments. Okay, you run an agarose gel. Okay, you will be taking, when you run an agarose gel, you will see all kinds of fragments. Short fragments will run, will run fast, will migrate fast, and then you will be using marker which will tell you what is the region that you're looking at, 20 kilobase pairs, right? So you purify this 20 kilobase per fragments, and then you cut this lambda bacteriophage vector, okay, with the restriction enzyme. So you essentially have removed this middle region, You have removed this middle region, okay, and then you would ligate them. You would ligate them to this 20 kilobase per fragment. So now you have a recombinant lambda virion, okay. Now instead of carrying this, this region, which was a replaceable region, now carries the human genome, okay. And so this is called as a packaging. So the commercial company, these are all available commercially, okay. All you need to do is they send it out as a lambda packaging extract. So packaging extract will have part of this vector, right, that has been digested, that has been cleaved, that has been removed of this middle fragment. You will be using your gene of your genomic DNA of interest. Some people may use human genomic DNA. There are people who are interested in mouse genomic DNA or any other organism's genomic DNA. After doing this, after digesting with appropriate restriction enzyme, you can ligate it. Okay. Now you have to understand one thing, that here you are cutting with SAW3A and you are cutting with BAMH1. How come these two ends are compatible? There are certain enzymes that work in this way. Okay, and these are called as isoschizomers. Okay, that means you can generate, typically in normal restriction enzymes, if you cut with BAMH1, you can have those vectors can only accept BAMH1 restricted inserts, genomic DNA that has been cut with BAMH1, right? But there are certain special cases where this enzyme SAW3A has produces a similar overhang like BAMH1. So these are ligatable. These are ligatable. For example, you cannot ligate an EcoR1 and a BAMH1 cut vector. You cannot. Okay. Similarly, you can't cut with two different restriction enzymes and ask it to ligate. That will not happen. But there are special cases. There are special cases when you can use certain restriction enzymes, right? And which will result in what is called as a compatible end. In this case, SAW3A and BAMH1 have compatible ends. That is why you are able to clone it. Okay. Can we move to the next slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So this is typically diagrammatically represented here. You have this huge genomic DNA. You have partially digested the restriction endonuclease, and then you size select this 20 kilobase pair fragments, and then this is the cohesive end for the lambda phage. You are going to ligate it, so it is essentially going to create what is called as a concatemer. So you have a cos end, you have a cos end, you have a cos end, right? You incubate this with lambda phage packaging extract, which has head and tail separately. The head cannot assemble to tail unless the head is full of DNA. Okay, so it basically takes this cohesive end, recognizes the second cohesive end. The moment it recognizes second cohesive end, it will cleave it. Okay, and so the lambda phage, carries different, pieces of your genomic DNA. In this case, I'm just showing an example of genomic DNA, human genomic DNA. So it carries different amounts, different parts of your human genomic DNA. Now you need to screen these libraries for your gene of interest. Okay, so approximately in this case about 80. As I said, you can screen up to anywhere between 5 to 50,000 lambda phages can be screened on a petri dish. Depends on the size of the petri dish. Okay, you can screen anywhere between 5,000 to 50,000 in one stretch. Remember, this is such a big advance compared to doing it with plasmids. Plasmids, you cannot do more than 100 colonies at any given time. Okay, so this is advanced. Okay, so this would require, if you want to screen the entire human genomic library, this would require about 40 plates, 40 petri dishes with about 20,000 pages on each. Okay, and each as the bacteriophage lyses the bacteria, it produces what is called as a plaque, and each plaque has DNA from different segments of the genome. Okay, this can be transferred to what is called as a nitrocellulose or a nylon membrane. So these are also available from vendors depending on the your size of the petri dish, right? If you're using a large petri dish, you can ask them for a larger nylon membrane or nitrocellulose membrane. If you're using a regular petri dish, it comes in the regular size. So it depends on the size, okay? And you can basically put this in the last video, we saw that, right? You can drop this nitrocellulose or nylon membrane into this petri dish, which has all these, flakes. You put some orientation markers, you remove it, okay? You treat them with certain buffers, and then you have all these things get attached to it, okay? And then you can use a radioactive probe, or you can use an antibody. There are different ways by which you can screen, and then you can expose it to the X-ray film, and that X-ray film will show you, where your clone of interest is located. Okay, then you can purify this clone. You'll have to come back to this plate because you cannot use this. You can come back to this plate because you have put some orientation markers. You will know which is the clone that is responsible for this, and then you can purify that, and you can share it, sequence it, study, do all those studies. Okay, cDNA clones are copies of messenger RNAs. We all know that, right? Most of the genomic DNA is not expressed at all. In fact, 98% of the human genomic DNA is not expressed. Only 2% of the entire genome is expressed. Okay, so many issues about, or if you want to study gene functions, are easily examined by looking at the exon part of it rather than the entire gene part, right? So the cDNA copies of messenger RNA, they primarily contain sequences which encode the protein, right? Therefore, cDNA clones are very useful in many studies of the gene function. If you want to look at the product as such, then it makes a lot of sense for us to make a cDNA library rather than a genomic library. On the other hand, if you want to study how this gene is expressed, what are all the controlling elements, what is the structure of the promoter, is there anything beyond the promoter like enhancers, or silencers, then you would need genomic library. Otherwise, cDNA library is the best. Okay, so all eukaryotes have a messenger RNA, and each messenger RNA will be coding for a specific protein, and this messenger RNA, by using an enzyme called reverse transcriptase, can be copied, and you can make it what is called as a cDNA, which can then be cloned in either plasmid or phages, depending on your choice, right? And cDNA clones only contain exons; they don't contain introns. Okay, so the first step in creating a cDNA library is to isolate all the messenger RNAs. When you isolate RNA, you are going to have 98% of the RNA that you will isolate is from ribosomes. So ribosomal RNAs are going to dominate more than 90%. Okay, and then you have lots and lots of transfer RNAs, right? You see all these. This is ribosomal RNA. This is your messenger RNA. This is your transfer RNA. So typically, messenger RNAs constitute about 2%. Okay, about 2%. Ribosomal RNA and transfer RNAs constitute about 98% of the cellular nucleic acid. How do we purify only messenger RNA? It's very easy because all eukaryotic messenger RNAs are what is called as a poly A tail, right? So scientists have been very clever. What they use is they have a matrix in which there are several T's that they attach to several T's. So typically, by complementary base pairing, all the messenger RNAs will come and make contact with this oligo DT. Okay, and when you do a buffer wash, when you wash with certain buffers, all these things will go away. All the ribosomal RNA, all the transfer RNA will go away. Okay, and you can essentially purify pure messenger RNA simply by using a matrix that has an oligo DT, right? Oligo DT columns. Okay, is this clear? So once the messenger RNA is isolated, it is treated with reverse transcriptase. Okay, reverse transcriptase is found in many retroviruses. Right, all retroviruses have RNA as a genome, which they use this reverse transcriptase to convert into cDNA, and then the cDNA is the one that gets either integrated into the genome, or the cDNA serves as a template for making the RNA copies of the genome. Right. So by hybridizing the poly A of the messenger RNA with the oligo DT, you are essentially creating a primer, the way we will do for PCR, right? And reverse transcriptase basically recognizes this template, and it will start adding bases to the 3' end. Okay, so typically this is what happens. You have taken the messenger, you have purified the messenger RNA by virtue of the fact that it has a poly A tail. Okay, now you use this oligo DT. Okay, first step, you used oligo DT for purification. So that is in the form of a matrix. That means it's like a solid support. You can't use that for priming synthesis. So instead, now you use soluble oligo DTs. Okay, and you will prime the synthesis of your converting the RNA to cDNA by the use of reverse transcriptase, and you will have the first strand cDNA synthesis, right? And then you will remove this RNA. This RNA is no longer necessary, right? So you will remove it, and then typically, if you look at the prokaryotic, eukaryotic messenger RNA, they have a 5' methyl guanosine cap, right? They have just as they have a poly A tail in the 3', they have a G, a stretch of series of methylated guanines in the 5' region. So we can essentially theoretically use poly C, and you can prime the synthesis of the second strand, and that's typically what happens, right? And then you would ligate, you would ligate certain either linkers or adapters depending on the choice, and you can cut with appropriate restrictions. If you're using EcoR1 linker, you would cut with EcoR1. If you're using BAMH1 linkers, you would cut with BAMH1, and then you can ligate this into either the lambda phage packaging extract that we saw, or you could use any other enzyme and package with the lambda thing. So whether it is CDN library or genomic library, when it comes to cloning into lambda vector, that step remains the same. Okay, it is only your starting material that changes, whether it is genomic DNA, or whether it's going to be a cDNA. That changes. If it is a cDNA, then you're going to essentially go through this entire steps, right? Okay. So this is schematically shown here, right? So you have a series of DNTPs, and that DNTPs is what converts the this oligo DT into the first strand. You would hydrolyze the remaining RNA with alkali. Right? Typically, if you have low doses of sodium hydroxide, the 2' hydroxyl group of the RNA is much more susceptible to alkaline hydrolysis, and the RNA gets chopped into small pieces, whereas the DNA is stable. Okay, the DNA is stable, and so nothing happens to the DNA. Okay, and now the question, as I said, is you have a series of G's, right? You have a methylated thing. You can use a series of C's as a primer, and you can do the reverse transcriptase. You will have a duplex cDNA. This duplex cDNA can be ligated either to a plasmid, or it can be ligated to lambda phage, as the case may be. Okay, but there are certain limitations. Genomic library, there is no fuss. You size select, you go ahead and ligate. I think that's a fairly easy process. But with cDNA, there are certain limitations. Initially, people didn't realize it, but as people got experience, then they realized there are certain issues. The first thing is the first strand synthesis generally doesn't go to completion. That means the reverse transcriptase that we use for making a cDNA, unfortunately, doesn't completely go all the way to the 5' end. Somewhere along the line it falls off, right? And only very few molecules are completely synthesized. Okay, so individual cDNA clones invariably will frequently have a reverse complement only to certain part of the messenger RNA, and you will have multiple cDNA clones from a single messenger RNA. Maybe that means that you will have overlapping clones. Some may have stopped after 50%. Some will have traversed all the way to 60%. Some would have traversed about 70%. But as it goes beyond a certain point, generally 100% is not obtained. Okay, and the second thing is priming of the second strand invariably is a highly inefficient process. Okay. Unfortunately, some methods result in the loss of sequence at the 5' end, so it becomes very, very difficult to use primer to synthesize your second strand. But people have been smart enough, right? So as usual, whenever there is a problem, you always have scientists finding out a way to overcome that. Okay, how do they overcome this? They use what are called as random hexamers. You have a pool of random 6-mers. Just as you have oligo dt, you have random 6-mers which can bind, and you can use them for priming your second strand synthesis. Okay, now the question is, if you have a cDNA library, how do you find a clone of the desired gene from this? A cDNA library can have greater than 100,000 individual clones, and it can contain as much as 50,000 different messenger RNAs. As I said, when the reverse transcriptase does, it doesn't do a complete job. So for any given gene, you're going to have multiple clones. Okay, the frequency of occurrence of a cDNA from any given gene reflects the abundance of mRNA for that gene. Okay, for example, there are certain genes that are expressed at very high levels. Okay, and there are certain genes that are expressed at a minimal level, and there are certain genes that may be expressed at a bare minimal level, right? Genes that are not immediately essential, those genes may not be expressed at all. So the messenger RNA for those genes are going to be very low. For example, all the glycolytic enzyme, anything that is responsible for protein synthesis, all those messenger RNAs are going to be expressed at a very high level. On the other hand, if you are growing cells at 37 degrees centigrade, will they be expressing heat shock messenger RNA? Probably not. They are probably going to express them at a very, very low level, extremely low level, right? So if you look at a clone, depending on the clone, if it is expressed at a very high level, you're going to have the frequency with which you're going to find it is going to be very higher. If if you're looking for a gene that is expressed in a very low copy or very low number, then you're looking at like it's like taking a needle from a haystack kind of stuff, right? You have to find this one gene out of these 100,000 different individual clones, right? But there are ways. Remember the lecture that we saw from MIT. There are different ways by which you can figure out how to do this. Okay, so there are certain strategies for clone screening the cDNA clones. One is called as the brute force screen for abundant cDNAs. Okay, so you basically screen every brute force means you are using a large amount of force to screen. Large amount of force means in this case you are going to screen as many colonies as possible and look for your gene of interest. The second thing will be, suppose you are interested in, say, you have either you have or one of the researcher anywhere else has a copy of this gene that you're interested, right? But it is not from human. You're interested in human gene, but that person has a mouse gene or has from some other organism. You can take that gene of interest from that person, and you can simply do what is called as a hybridization. As we all know, human genome and other genomes. Genes share a lot of okay, back. The other thing is to express the cDNA in the host cell to make a functional protein. And then once it makes a functional protein, it's easy. You can either use an antibody to figure out which is the clone that is producing this protein of interest, or sometimes some of these can be in the form of a receptor. They're expressing a ligand, and you can express a specific receptor and find out which is the clone of interest, or you can simply do a complementation the way we saw in that MIT lecture. It can be looking for a function. It could be a leucine gene, it could be an arginine gene, it could be a histidine gene, it could be a uracil gene. Okay, or you can also do what is called as a differential analysis. We'll see quickly what those things are. Okay, so screening by hybridization. Okay, in this case, this case for bacterial clones. Okay, this we saw in the last time's lecture also, right? So these are clones that are plated. You put a nitrocellulose or a nylon membrane. So you actually have a replica of this thing colonies. Okay, you can hybridize them with the gene of interest which you have obtained. You may have a mouse homolog, you may have a rat homolog, you may have a rabbit homolog, any other homolog, right? And you can figure out, assuming that this is the clone that is lighting up, you can detect by autoradiogram. You can go back to this plate and see which is the colony of interest to you, right? Screening by expression, as I said, you can put them into an expression vector and see whether it is getting expressed or not simply by the use of a antibody. Okay, antibodies are going to bind very specifically to this product. Okay, and you can screen that easily. The other thing is to screen in eukaryotic cells, right? So let's say this is a eukaryotic cell that needs a cytokine, for example, say IL-3 to grow, but it has no erythropoietin receptor, EPO receptor. So in the absence of EPO, it will not grow. So you have put all these into mammalian expression vectors. You have transfected the cell, right? And then now once this gets expressed, you have this erythropoietin receptor and the ligand, right? And now, now it can grow without in the absence of this thing, IL-3. And now you can use this, the clone that is present in this, you can isolate and you can sequence and find out whether this is the clone for the EPO receptor or not. Okay. The other thing is to do what is called as differential analysis. Now, instead of looking for one particular cDNA, you can look for cDNA for all genes whose expression differs. For example, suppose somebody is interested in understanding, what is the difference between a normal skin cell and a cancerous skin cell. Okay, you have cutaneous sarcomas. Cutaneous sarcomas are nothing but skin cancer, right? You can take skin cancer cells, we can take a normal cell and find out what is it that is different in the cancer cell by doing what is called as subtractive hybridization. You can do what is called as differential display, or you can do what is called as hybridizing it to massively parallel array of cDNA. These are called as microarrays. Okay, these are called as microarrays. You can do any one of these three: subtractive hybridization, differential display, or hybridization to microarrays. And typically this is what happens. For example, this is a mouse cell line that has the potential to differentiate into many different cell types. Okay, by the use of an chemical called 5-azacitidine, right? You can force these cells to either go into myocyte, adipocyte, or chondrocytes. Okay, this cell now, instead of being this thing multipotent, you are now limiting them to only these cell types, and then you can analyze these cells, okay, and find out what is the difference in a myocyte versus this cell line, what is the difference in the adipocyte versus this cell line, and chondrocyte or cartilage versus this cell line, and you can know what are the genes that are responsible for transforming this cell into a myocyte, adipocyte, or a chondrocyte. Okay. That is what happens in differential analysis. What happens in subtractive hybridization is that you take the messenger RNA from this, you also take the messenger RNA from myocyte, convert that into a cDNA, okay, and this cDNA is now radio labeled. When you synthesize this cDNA, you are going to use an isotope, okay, you're going to use an isotope, okay, and you mix these two, mix this radio labeled cDNA with excess messenger RNA from this cell line, okay, so you essentially now have messenger RNA, cDNA duplexes, and messenger RNA and cDNA alone. Okay, so typically you pass it through a column called hydroxyl apatite. Okay, hydroxyl apatite will bind to messenger RNA and cDNA duplex. Okay, they bind to the column. Anything that is cDNA as such, which is not bound to any messenger RNA, will be gone, and then messenger RNA as such will also not bind to this hydroxyl apatite column. Okay. Now, after you do this, you can elute out, you can remove the mixture of messenger RNA and cDNA duplex. Okay. And then you can sequence, or you can hybridize, you can do variety of techniques to find out what messenger RNAs are expressed in myocyte compared to this parental cell line. So these are different ways. These are different ways by which you can do. You can do similarly, what is called as reverse transcriptase mediated PCR. You can do essentially very similar thing and find out what is the difference in the genes that are expressed between two cell types. I just gave you the example of a normal skin and a cancerous cell, but it could be any two different ones, cell types, that need to be compared. Okay. Nowadays, of course, it is much easier to sequence everything, and because you have lots of these databases that have some information, you can sequence everything. Then you can come back and ask the question, what is this gene that is what is the protein it is coding for, and what is the function of this protein. Okay, it is possible. This is just showing you again figuratively how the cDNA gets packed. Okay, and this is the same thing that we have seen. Of course, lambda phages are much better than plasmids because they can carry almost like 20 kilobase pairs of DNA. But back vectors can carry even larger, instead of 20 kilobase pairs, you can carry up to 300 kilobase pairs of DNA. Okay, and there are this is an example of a bacterial artificial chromosome. Okay, and what this does is it converts sucrose to levain. So this SACB2, encodes an enzyme called levain sucrase, which converts the sucrose to levain, which is toxic to the bacteria. Okay. Now, when you clone your gene, you will be cutting here, in this place, and basically removes this stuffer fragment. And when you have a large insert, the reading of this gene is disrupted, and because of this, no toxic levain is produced, and you're essentially doing a positive selection for recombinant. So because this, for some reason they come back, they're going to have this functional SACB2, which is going to encode for this enzyme, and so the bacteria will die. On the other hand, when you have a large insert, this gene loses its function, and so essentially you are going to carry this entire insert, and those are going to be recombinants, right? Recombinant E. coli. Now, although you can use Cosmates, BACs, PACs, YACs, etc. for cloning larger DNA fragments, we simply use lambda phage library. The question why we use lambda phage libraries is for the following reason. Cosmates replicate as very high copy number plasmids tend to be unstable, when large pieces of human genomic DNA or any genomic DNA is put into cosmates, they generally are unstable and they delete, lots of these DNA fragments, and you end up with getting all kinds of permutations and combinations of those. So we don't want to be dealing with that. BAC and YAC libraries are kind of difficult to prepare. They're highly technically oriented, and the success rate is also low. The larger the size of the DNA, the more difficult to work. So 20 kilobase per is something that is reasonably easy to work with, right? Anything beyond 20, 30 kilobase per, it becomes very, very difficult. Okay. Even for routine purposes, 20 kilobase per works the optimal. This is something that we saw in the last class and also the previous class. How many clones, when you make a library, how many clones you need to make it as a representative library. Okay, so this is given by a simple formula, natural log 1 minus P, okay, divided by natural log 1 minus F. This should be divided. Okay. So for a lambda library with an average insert size of 17 kilobase pair, and if you assume that the human genome of 3 billion base pairs, then we need to have a library of about 800,000 clones to have a probability of 0.99% of having all the genes in the library. Okay. So you need, if you are doing in lambda, then you need to have about 800,000 clones. On the other hand, if you are doing it in the BAC library or bacterial artificial chromosome, where the insert size is of the order of 300 kilobase pair. Remember, it is 17 kilobase pair. Here it is 300 kilobase pair for the same, human genome, and the probability of finding 0.99%. Then this turns out to be around 46,000 clones, which is manageable. Okay, but then we need to understand that BAC libraries are difficult to construct. This is extremely laborious. To screen 800,000 clones is extremely laborious and time intensive, labor intensive, but it is easy to do compared to BAC library, which is time consuming, but at the same time, instead of having to deal with 800,000 clones, you're going to deal with only 46,000 clones, right? So it all depends on the expertise that is available in any laboratory. If your laboratory is doing BACs or bacterial artificial chromosomes very routinely, then it becomes easy to use a BAC library. Otherwise, this lambda library to a large extent works very well for routine purposes. Okay. And this is something that I said. You can now sequence everything, and the sequencing cost used to be fairly high, but now the sequencing costs have come down, and you can do sequencing for a fairly reasonable price, right? And then once you sequence, everything gets into the database, and by academic nature, whenever you find any novel sequence, it is has to be deposited into the NCBI database, right? And so other larger, academic this thing, community can use it. And also, once you make it available in the academic database, you have a lot of computational tools that are available. that you can use now to analyze the gene function and see whether there are any homologs that are available in other organisms and all that. So it becomes, bioinformatics has definitely transformed, the way we do molecular biology and other science, right? I'm sure you have been exposed to bioinformatics and the tools, right? So, so that kind of, finishes this module. We look at other modules in our subsequent classes. Okay. Any questions that you may have? Okay. In the absence of any question, we'll meet in our next class. All right. Have a safe weekend. God bless you all. Bye.